Now the session 6, Technology and Innovation. I'd like to invite the chairman, Kemal İnan from Sabancı University. And the lead speakers are Lan Hua from Tsinghua, Usal Shahbaz from TEPAV, Najesh Kumar from UNESCO, Timur Makhmutov from RIASC, and Berin Benli from Novisense, and Yusuf Işık.
Okay, so we come to the last session, technology and innovation. Usually last sessions are always unfortunate. Why? Because people are hungrier, more sleepy. Although the two do not reinforce each other, still, it's a problem. I'm impressed by the timing discipline. The first session had an error of 100%, the second session about 50%, and the third 20%. You see the improvement, right? It really improved. Okay, so the topic is technology and innovation. Well, having read the presentations, going through the summary of the presentations, I think that the importance, the panel members have really appreciated the importance of this topic for the future of humanity. Very important. But there are people who think otherwise. I know two economists, I won't give the names, two reputable economists who believe that the season of low-hanging fruit that you can pick up is past, and technology has come to a plateau, and then because of that there is unemployment. This is one of the most ridiculous views I've seen, two economists. I think, to even come up with this is complete ignorance of what's happening on the technological front. Now, let's come to our topic. Let me say a few words about the role of technology. Now, again, the panel members, when I went through their suggestions and proposals, it's a lot of goodwill is there. And the main idea is that there should be more communication between the developed countries and the LDCs, and there should be transfer of technology and joint projects and collaboration. Goodwill plays a role here, right? Goodwill, and then obviously because of this collaboration, greater productivity will prevail. Well, such advices are nice, but in my life, throughout my life, I've never seen goodwill play a role in such things, right? Usually, selfishness plays a much greater role. So whenever we are talking about such collaboration, we should always think whether the proposals are win-win or not. If one side is supposed to assist the other side, where one wins and the other doesn't win at all, then usually that deal does not work properly. And that brings me to one of the nice comments made one of the talkers before, whose talk I really enjoyed, comments I enjoyed, and the name is Mr. Jovanovic. He made very nice comments, but one comment I was perplexed. He said that the reason why capital does not flow into Europe is ideological. Right? In the infrastructure, he gave the examples of the Far East and all that. Why doesn't it flow there? Then I thought, look, multinationals all moving either to China or India. Is it because of ideological reasons that they didn't move into Portugal and Greece? Not convincing at all. It's not convincing. So the reason why the capital, the multinationals moved into China and is not China and India, I gave just two examples, is almost purely economical. So it's difficult to say that it's ideological. Now, again, our friend from Oxford said it, and we all know it. The interest rates in the world can even be negative. What does it mean? The cost of money is not expensive. It's cheap. And he said this is an opportune moment to make investments. The private sector should make investments in infrastructure because capital is cheap. What does that mean? Let's translate this. It means that the returns to capital are not necessarily high if it is cheap. And we also know that there is rampant unemployment and the wage levels are low. So the actual wealth that's generated goes neither to capital nor to where the hell does it go, right? This is the question addressed and answered by two MIT, one MIT scientist and another professor from MIT. And their answer to this problem was that to superstars. And I would like to, maybe two superstars, that's an exaggeration, but to stars and superstars, to something called the creative labor. Labor that is able to, so whatever is in the production, those who work on the design stage, not the reproduction stage, okay? So this is the role of technology. Now, when we talk about the win-win situation and ask for the developed countries are in deep trouble. Why? US is in deep trouble and some of the European countries are in deep trouble. The unemployment rate, say in a place like Spain, which is not really a poor country, is more than 55% in youth. And when you look at the unemployment figures, the figures are very high. What's happening? That means that they are in deep trouble. So the first thing we have to understand and address, goodwill is something good. I understand that. And indeed, the G20 is a nice platform to establish such a collaboration between developed countries and less developed countries. Why? Because some of the countries in G20 are those who can see both sides of the fence because they've reached the threshold of a certain height, they can see both sides of the picture. They have such an advantage because their recent past is less developed and their aspiration lies with the developed world, right? So they can see. But, let's not forget, technology is a double-edged sword. So I'll come to something quite different here, and which is something that I think that G20 should address. Technology is a double-edged sword. We should ask the following questions. High salaried unemployment due to automation. I'm not talking about the routine labor being left out because of automation, but high salaried unemployment due to automation. And I'll give you one example. This is no joke. This is not science fiction. I can even give you the company name for which this happens. In the area of medicine, actually in the area of radiology, the technology in computer vision, something called deep learning in artificial intelligence, has come to such a stage that it can automate, technologically replace people who are educated in faculties of medicine for more than 10 years. And this is very important. Why? Because replacement of high salaried labor with automation has big financial returns. If you can do the same job instead of with 5 persons, just 1 person, then you earn a lot of money. And hospitals are doing that. Now, the word used for such technologies is disruptive technologies. They disrupt the existing order, and at the highest level for the most educated labor. Now, the asymmetry in this problem is that in LDCs, exactly the opposite happens. In other words, what is the technology being disruptive in the developed country becomes productive in the less developed regions. Because if you can replace such qualified labor, which less developed countries have in very small numbers have that, right? Then that should be something welcomed by the less developed countries. So this is a very asymmetrical problem. And then I think it's worthwhile investigating the areas in which this asymmetry prevails. I just gave one example of medicine, but I can give other examples in education, in legal profession, those who prepare the background reports for the legal. All of these could be automated and are being automated, right, by technology. If you can replace such labor by technology, this is good news for the less developed countries. And it is really bad news for the developed countries. Because the nature of the unemployment hits those who are educated. That disrupts your educational institutions. People are not motivated to be educated. It has lots of disruptions. It's a very important problem. These are all new problems and under-investigated problems. These are just coming to the surface, and I think if we investigate that, we'll see an entirely different picture when we try to compare the developed and the less developed world. We see that the old symmetry is not there. What is the old symmetry? Country A developed, great, say Germany, and those who produce bread in Germany also get high salaries. Not because they are more productive, because they are in a developed country and taxes help us. But if the guy in Poland is doing the same bread for much, much less, then maybe the work will move there, just like some of the work is moving to China. Okay? So what's happening? The income differentials between nations have become income differentials within countries. That's very important. And this is the reason of the disruption and unemployment in developed countries. And I think these are things that should be addressed by G20. These are all new topics. And for example, I was asked to prepare a proposal. How about a proposal like this? What are the new disruptive technologies? And what are the future prospects? Even naming of the companies who do that, right? And what would be the future for that, for developed world and for the underdeveloped? What would be the nature of the collaboration between these two parts of the world? I think these are important problems. So these are my initial comments on the topic, and I would like to now lead the floor to our panelists. And in the order that I have here, Mr. Shu, I think, is the first speaker. Please, sir, it's your turn.
Well, I think I was first, very sad to hear Barry's comment on all issues are important, but some are less important. Given that this is the last one, and I was very sad to hear that, but I think thanks for our eloquent chairman that really brings this issue up. I think that, so I will talk about on three issues, and why is innovation important for G20? The second is what are specific issues that we should bring into the discussion about innovation on the issue of related to global governance. And the third is how do we actually move from here? I think, first of all, I think why innovation is important. I think our chairman has already mentioned it very eloquently, and I think that we just came from an OECD conference on innovation strategy, and Ms. Baumann and I, we were both there. And I think that there was actually one issue that had been brought up is that indeed actually the most important source of economic growth is productivity growth. And knowledge innovation comes in many ways. Of course, one is from the knowledge capital itself, but also comes in ways in sort of tangible capital where technologies is embedded, and also is from multi-factor productivity growth. So all of those are sources of economic growth related to innovation. And also I think that we also should not forget that now we are facing many global challenges. For example, the climate change, the aging society, and the depletion of natural resources. So all of those require us to find new solutions, and where again our innovation plays a critical role. So I think if G20 is really going to make the transition from a sort of emergency management mechanism to one that is really on the future global economic growth, I think we have to address a long-term issue such as innovation. So I think there's nothing more important for G20 to really make the transition to focus on some of the most important long-term issues, including innovation and many others. And the second issue I want to talk about is why innovation is needed to be addressed in G20, which is as a global governance forum. I think the three, this morning people talked about 3 I's. So I want to use the 3 I's to illustrate my point. The first one is investment. I think that it's critically important for maintaining proper long-term investment in research, in knowledge generation, so that actually we can, in many years later, and we can have the future internet, the future, MOOCs, and the future of other many new technologies. I just saw in the bookstore we have some journals on production engineering, the Journal of Production Engineering. We don't know how many of the products that actually today we're using benefited from the articles published in those articles. I think so. In a way, I think that's the nature of innovation, that you invest today and in years later that you'll benefit from it. And now I think with the economic crisis, what we see is that there's a decline in global investment in R&D. I just got a report this morning from a US think tank. And what they found is that there's a decline in university research, even in the US, in the last few years from 2011 to 2013. There's a negative. If you put in the real dollar, I think it's a decline of a few percentage. So I think that somehow, I think in this age of the economic crisis, how do we making sure that we maintain the investment for the future? And so here I think that one thing that at least the G20 can think about is how do we coordinate investment in R&D? I think I think China and many other countries are still maintaining the momentum. So I think maybe there's a way that we can coordinate the investment in basic research and to making sure that indeed we do have the proper investment. The second issue is on implementation. Is how to make the useful knowledge generated through the research and development to work for economic development and also for global development. I think that here there are several issues that we have to address. The first is the obstacles that actually prevent breakthroughs and technical progress in science and technology from being implemented in the market. I think that I think as being mentioned that indeed some of the disruptive technology that may bring risks that needs to be properly governed. I think without proper regulatory structure, without properly being governed, I think there are indeed many public trust problem. So I think it was in our discussion at the OECD, the so-called social license, that indeed many general public, they do not trust the scientists and they are really concerned about the application of these new technologies. So how can we develop a proper global governance for these new technologies to address the internet securities, privacy issues, safety issues related to gene testing, and so on. So all of those, I think, require us to bring about a new global governance structure for new technologies. The second issue related to the implementation issue is international technology transfer. I'm glad that Ms. Amar has mentioned about this. I think it hasn't been talked about for many years. But still, I think we have so many new technologies, we have so many useful knowledge that out there that actually can help many developing countries, can help actually us to improve the efficiency of energy use, that can really address the climate change problem. I think I saw a graph that basically saying that if we can make efficient use of existing technology without having to find new technologies, the climate emissions can be drastically reduced. But unfortunately, because of the problems we have, the obstacles we have, many of those technologies are not properly used. So how can we find a way to exploit those technologies and to making sure that indeed their full advantage are being taken, fully taken. And the third is also on the inclusiveness. The third I see inclusiveness. I think, again, here that we need to find ways to making sure that indeed how knowledge generated can benefit to all the people that are in this globe. And currently, indeed, we see many of the breakthroughs, technology breakthroughs that only benefit a few technological entrepreneurs, but at the cost of many millions of jobs being displaced. So I think how can we find a new ways of really distribute the benefits from those technology breakthroughs. So that's, again, I require us to think about the new global structures so that actually we can indeed making sure that the innovation can benefit all. Now, how can we move from here? I think that this is something that I think the G20, as a the T20 as a think tank platform that can help the G20 to move things forward. I think, first of all, I think we should establish a dialogue with B20, with Business 20, to listen to the policy, to listen to the business community, to hear from what their views in terms of what are the obstacles, what are the need for policy change in the innovation domain, so that actually, our T20 can really bring those issues and to prioritize them and to study them, and then to make policy suggestions to the leaders, so that actually we can bring this agenda forward. And finally, I just want to emphasize that the innovation is a long-term investment that's often very easily being ignored. I mean, unless we do that properly right now, I think when the crisis comes, innovation will be ignored again. Thank you.
Next is Mr. Shahbaz.
Okay, I'll speak very briefly. Not only that we are very late, but also there was little time for me to get prepared. And I'll speak on the internet economy and its relation to G20. This looks very interesting to me because there is I'll give you some numbers. There is a widely cited report of Boston Consulting Group on internet economy in G20 countries. It says the total size of internet economy in G20 countries last year was $4.2 trillion US. And if this was a sovereign economy, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world. And the growth rate overall, over the last 5 years actually equals the growth rate of China. So internet economy really matters for the global economy. And internet is not a technical issue, it's an economic issue. Nevertheless, if you search for the word internet in the G20 communiques since the beginning, you never see that word. So G20 has been completely ignorant to internet and the policy issues regarding the governance of internet. It is not the same for all the international community and think tanks. So as actually I mentioned in the beginning, in the morning, G20 generally uses the papers and reports prepared by OECD, World Bank, etc. And all of these institutions are very much into the internet economy. OECD in particular, they have a completely, a dedicated branch for this, and they produce a lot of material. World Bank, next year in 2016, their flagship report, the World Development Report, will be on internet economy. And this think tank community is actually also producing a lot of material on the internet. For example, CG and Chatham House last year established a special commission on internet, which was chaired by Carl Bildt, the foreign minister of Sweden. And they came up with very concrete proposals targeted to, for new actions by the international community. That said, the G20 itself has never, taken internet into consideration. And I'd like to point out 4 issues that can be, an area that G20 can, study, commission studies and take into agenda and finally, come up with some decisions. We know that this won't happen this year or the next year, but I think it will finally be on the agenda. The reason that the decision is very hard is because of the big divergence between the countries and how they regard these issues. And let me tell you the 4 points. One is the protection of personal data and harmonization of regulations of protection of personal data between different economies. This is very important because of 2 reasons. One, now many countries are in an inclination to actually completely ban cross-border data flows. Russia was the first one to do this, effective next year. They have a legislation, if it is applied, it won't be possible to transfer the personal data of Russian citizens to any other country, which will mean in turn that cloud computing applications will not work in Russia, Gmail will not work in Russia, and there will be many problems. And this can start a trend actually. Brazil was considering a similar legislation last year, but they didn't do that. They ended up with a completely different legislation, but it was a discussion issue. The other point is, in the countries that doesn't ban the cross-border data transfers, but that has legislation to protect personal data, if you are to transfer personal data to another country, that country has to satisfy the same standards. And since these standards diverge between countries, it is very hard for the intermediaries, internet operators, companies that do business over internet to do operations in different jurisdictions. And this is even in the G7 group between United States and EU, there are big differences, and actually they are going to completely different directions at the moment in terms of how they approach to protection of personal data. So it is, I think, a very important area for the health of internet economy and in turn the global economy that G20 should take into its agenda. The second point is the governance of internet. As you may know, the United States and EU, they always defend this, what they call the multi-stakeholder governance model, in which users, companies, NGOs, and sovereign states govern the internet together. What we see is that as the internet becomes more important, this system is not working. The sovereign states, they impose their rules on the internet. We know that from Turkey. We know that from China. Actually, these 2 presidents of, consecutive presidents of G20 are leading these new, bans over the internet. And, there is a political reason for this. So I think this has become an issue that cannot be resolved under this multi-stakeholder governance model. But it should be, taken to a political platform, and G20 is an ideal platform for that. The third point relates to infrastructure. It's about the governance of infrastructure, not the investment to infrastructure. It's the net neutrality. Net neutrality is now a big issue in the United States. There is a new Supreme Court decision. Now, not all bits over the internet are equal. Some companies can pay to the infrastructure providers for larger bandwidth. But if this happens in the United States, it will directly affect other countries, and vice versa. So these regulations should also be coordinated. And the fourth area is actually the cybersecurity. There is a big need for cross-country collaboration in cybersecurity area, and we will start to see much more attacks on companies, on states from cybersecurity point of view, and the cross-country collaboration will gain importance. Just like these tax issues, cybersecurity should also be on the G20 agenda. So these are the 4, topics that I have identified, and I think the T20 community can lead this agenda and bring it to the attention of G20 leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shahbaz. Next speaker is Mr. Kumar, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me also begin by thanking Tepao and CG for inviting me and being part of this group. Very interesting discussion since morning. I'd like to just continue what is being discussed about the technology, and my colleague from China had already raised some of the issues, and earlier in the previous session, Amar was talking about the importance of sustainable development goals and G20 to play an important role and throwing its weight behind them, and particularly about the issues of finance and development and the means of implementation. I think it is very well said, and I'll just pick up from there. The important point about the transition from MDGs to SDGs is that, I mean, a lot has been achieved, but a lot remains to be done. And of course, the Sustainable Development Goals agenda builds on the experiences and lessons from MDG experience. And, you know, one of them is the important role of sustainability challenges that now we know much better than compared to the year 2000, when the MDGs were adopted. So there is a much bigger awareness, and that is reflected in the 17 goals that you see proposed by the Open Working Group. The other is the recognition that the goal 8 of MDGs was not formulated very precisely, and it remained very general and wasn't, much did not happen, and it was very difficult to anyway track that goal and progress made there, because it was not, specified in very clear terms. So taking lessons from that, the SDGs, the way they have been formulated or proposed by Open Working Group, include a goal 17 on means of implementation, which talk about specifically on finance, technology, capacity building, trade, and systemic issues. And in particular on technology, because there is so heavy emphasis on sustainability in these 17 goals, which are mainstreamed in all different goals, but also put as standalone goals in terms of sustainable production and sustainable consumption. That is very much predicated on the availability of technologies to bring down the production and consumption to low carbon paths. And if that doesn't happen, the developing countries do not get the access and facilitation of technologies, then it would be nearly impossible to achieve that. And why it would be like this is the fact that there is a huge technological gap in the world. Whether you look at the geography of innovation or patenting or the royalties and technical fees, whichever indicator you look at, there's a huge asymmetry in the ownership of technologies. And the very important point is that this situation is not changing. Today, we look at whether ownership of patents or where the R&D inventive activity is taking place, or which countries have the largest share of royalties and technical fees. Top 10 OECD countries command in every indicator more than 80%. And this proportion hasn't changed over 30 years very much. Very small, a couple of points of change has happened, which is a disturbing thing. So the domination of technology continues to be a fact of life. And the other thing is that it has been compounded, the access issue of to technologies, particularly for new and advanced technologies which are central or critical for the climate change mitigation and adaptation, has been compounded further by a few trends. One is the declining, technology generation in public domain, such as that was done during the times of Green Revolution. A very important role was played by the public domain technology made available by CGIAR system. In agriculture research, there is this consultative group on international agricultural research which produced the new breeder lines which the national agriculture system of different countries were able to take and adapt them to their local situations and use them. And there is also a very strong trend of privatization of environmentally sensitive technologies. If you look at the patent data, I don't have time to elaborate that, but maybe we can come back to it in the discussion. And this third is, new rules, new trade rules through TRIPS and TRIMS, which have made it more difficult, for developing countries to absorb some of these technologies and build the technological capability. For instance, there is a whole host of literature which shows how the different developed countries of the world and the newly industrializing countries absorb knowledge through reverse engineering. And that process has been rendered more difficult now with the standardization and harmonization of intellectual property rights under TRIPS agreement. Similarly, some of the performance requirements imposed on foreign direct investments were used to absorb technology through joint venture requirements, for instance, through local content requirements, and those kinds of measures are now outlawed under TRIMS agreement of WTO. So there are these new realities to be confronted by developing countries when they want to develop their own technological capability, and that in the context of the sustainable development goals becomes a very binding, very important constraint. So what we need to do, I am just putting before your consideration 2-3 points. One is that we adopted TRIPS, the WTO agreement on TRIPS. That agreement actually has one of the objectives as technology transfer to developing countries. And there was an Article 66.2 of TRIPS which was left as a best endeavor clause and was never specified specifically. I think it is time in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals debate that we give a meaning to that Article 66.2 and specify that technology transfer is really to happen and what would be the conditions and ways and channels of that. The second possibility is, in 2004, the members of WTO created a waiver, a public health, a waiver from TRIPS agreement on the basis of public health emergencies. So governments, when they felt compelled, they could issue a compulsory license. If they were in a situation that there is a public health emergency and the companies which hold the technology are not sharing it with the country, they could issue a compulsory license, and the patents were rendered null and void. So using that precedence, whether on the basis of environmental emergencies, such waiver could be extended, could be another issue for consideration. And I think G20 countries, as a leading group of countries with such a large weight in the world economy, should throw their weight behind some of these reforms of the intellectual property system in WTO. And the third thing I would like to put on the table is the recognition and ability of some of the countries in developing world to do what is called as the frugal engineering. Frugal engineering is basically the creation of some possibilities that, that help to develop affordable products, because the volumes in these economies lie at the bottom of the pyramid, income pyramid. And India is one of the places, China is another, and many other developing countries have these possibilities of developing affordable products based on existing knowledge, but they are nevertheless, useful processes that bring down the costs, make things more affordable, save in that process materials and energy. And some examples are before all of us. For instance, generic medicines, the affordable medicines, they have changed the ballgame as far as health delivery is concerned, and HIV/AIDS, and that was actually one of the reasons why this public health waiver was adopted in the first place. The cheapest car in the world, or look at India's space program, which is able to set satellites in the orbit at a fraction of the cost. So these are the some of the examples of frugal engineering, and many companies are going to these markets or these countries to do frugal design, frugal engineering. And I think there is an opportunity in the context of sustainable development goals to develop these and invent the new low-carbon growth paths to go to these countries and do public funded research out of maybe this Global Climate Fund or whatever you have to pump money and resources to do more of the frugal engineering and affordable and low-carbon products. And finally, there is also a role for South-South cooperation, because many of the problems that the developing countries face, they have to find solutions, and they could do it together rather than each one is reinventing the wheel. And so pooling resources to set up common research centers of developing world and sharing the fruits of knowledge coming out of them could be a very important option. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Next speaker is Berin Hanım.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In our institute, we are heavily working on data innovation, and the majority of our work is on open data and the stuff that are related with, heavily related with data innovation and progress in the industries that are related with data. Actually, data is crossing all of the industries horizontally. So my policy note will be about open data and big data. So we are doing a lot of studies on big data arena, and some of the studies are related with strategic development strategies, future strategies of data, not in our country, but also globally. And the other part of our studies are around the proof of concept projects. We are trying to develop some concepts regarding data innovation in education, health, defense, creative industries, and in most of the industries we are trying to develop proof of concept projects. And once the proof of concept projects are successful, we are trying to increase the scale and trying to convert them into pilot projects. Once we see that, once we monitor and measure that the pilot projects are successful, then we are trying to scale them up throughout the whole country. So technology and innovation are the two major driving forces behind growth, competitiveness, and economic transformation. So I'm today very pleased that in this panel we are discussing the policies to facilitate technological development and applications. This year in World Economic Forum, it was stated that innovations in big data and technologies provide new opportunities with which we can better measure the goals of reducing extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity and making progress on the sustainable development goals. So today, we have an increasing range of new sources of data on population, on space, on time. They are cheaper than traditional approaches like household surveys, which are, however, richer in focused information. New sources of data, like aerial images of road networks, digital health records, phone call records, social media, sentiment, and environmental sensors, provide more frequent data flows that can be used to complement official statistics, empower citizens, and provide better monitoring and feedback loops. So, our research question and the statement for today's meeting here is open data policies fuel innovation and accelerate economic growth while contributing to sustainability. So what's the rationale behind it? As the Center of Data Innovation of IT Innovation Foundation stated this year, government agencies collect a vast amount of data that is available not only to the agencies that collected it, but also to many other stakeholders in the public and private industries. So by making their data freely available without any restrictions, government agencies can enable the private sector to leverage public data. To where to, for example, weather information, maps, legal filings, financial statements, health indicators, and education metrics. And the purpose is to develop new products and services and create new economic value. Already, a wide variety of companies have created innovations that were born from government data that has been made available for reuse. So how this statement relates to G20, let's try to build up the relation very shortly. Actually, there were some short questions assigned by Mr. Ussal Shahbaz. First question was about what is the governance gap regarding the issue. We believe that open data policies that provide better big data implementations, yielding better economic value creations, both in developed countries and also emerging countries. And the second question was about what are the global implications. So we are saying that more open data and more big data implementations provide better integration of policies, processes, and the services worldwide, and also accelerate economic growth. Why does this issue require high level of attention? Data is currently the most powerful instrument at all times at the global level, and will have increasingly more powerful that would change all the way of making businesses in all of the industries and managing economies. Can G20 effectively address this issue? Yes, we strongly believe that if prioritized in the right way, G2 could effectively address this issue. Is the effort required to address the issue proportionate to its relative priority? And the answer, yes. Since data innovation crosses all of the industries, and we have the full potential of creating better economies, the efforts that would potentially spent for it would worth and even be higher. And as a final statement, I would like to refer to World Economic Forum again, it was very clearly and explicitly stated that data will be very important this year, especially data-driven development. Big data will grow into more industries, more applications, more volumes of data with a growing potential to reach our mission. So we have clear goals and we have plenty of data and space to innovate, build capacity and optimize our resources. So, regarding the suggestions to enable the government agencies and institutions to provide more freely data available to other stakeholders, like private industries, like universities, and to all of the stakeholders, maybe new metrics could be developed to correlate the level of openness of data in government agencies with the economic growth. So, spending some efforts together, I mean the collaboration among private industry, NGOs, universities, all of the stakeholders might influence and might motivate, might inspire the government agencies to increase the level of openness of their data to be able to increase the economic growth. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, let me thank the organizers of this meeting. I think it is very appropriate for G20 to have a meeting of the think tanks of the countries of this group. And being last but one speaker, I don't have other choice but to follow the advice of Roosevelt, be sincere, be brief, and be seated. So I'll try to do this. Much has been spoken today about the multilateral institutions. There were a lot of critical opinions, but all these show us that still global challenges and also the global problems are still in the agenda, and we need to follow, think out of the box logic, and I think that this is the most appropriate logic when we speak about innovations and technology. So within this session, I would like to draw your attention to the internet and to its influence on development. I'm not going to speak much about cybersecurity. Usal probably mentioned all of the threats, even among some scientists and publications you will find such an opinion that internet and its development is the most powerful that we have nowadays, and probably we could compare it to a nuclear weapon. But I don't think that it is only a threat, but it is also an opportunity, and it is an opportunity to exchange views, to establish new links, and it is also an opportunity to manage the content of different internet resources. That is a topic that is very much close to the previous speaker's presentation, big data, but I would like to stress on the content itself. Each of you uses different internet resources, and I believe that each think tank presented here has its own website, and we understand that if we have a reliable resource, we have a reliable information. When we speak about the content management, we don't speak about regulation because it couldn't be regulated, but we speak about the ethics of presenting information for the consumers. So I think that this activity is very much appropriate for G20 development, and it is essential to different reasons. First of all, it's a need to exchange information. And the second is a need to establish new paths of cooperation within the group. In some presentations today, I heard some proof for these reasons. For example, Professor Curtin mentioned today the necessity to publish the results of annual G20 meetings and to make them accessible for the public. What G20 could do in this direction? This is my final point, and my proposal for all of us is to think of establishing a regular exchange of analytical information that we have within our think tanks, so that it could be accessed by any researcher, by any user of internet. Of course, there are differences in languages, in platforms, but information as it is, the analytical materials, a huge amount of it, I believe you have in your institutions, should be dismissed. And I think that it couldn't be sort of a club, a global think tank for the think tanks, but the information for all of us. So the proposal is to think of exchange of information between all those interested in it. English is the best language to do this, and I think that it will help to understand better what is going on within the G20 and to find new solutions to have the vision of new challenges, to be within the logic of thinking out of the box. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Yusuf Işık, an economist. There is no doubt whatsoever that the technology innovation nexus has transformed the world and is going to do so. And this is happening at a global scale. And I think this has reached such a level that I personally call this knowledge economy. And it also restructures the market. So it's not a question so much of a goodwill. While thanking very much our chairman for his very stimulating remarks, as far as I'm concerned, this is a question of mutual benefit. But the trouble is that, of course, if you apply short-termism, if you are selfish in the short term, you might lose in the long term. And technology is such a thing that it precisely requires a longer term, a risk sharing. And this risk sharing is not only between developing and developed, but also within developed or within developing or across this divide line, which I think is now a bit artificial as a result of the emergence of the knowledge economy. The world is not divided as much as before between developed and developing. Of course, this doesn't mean that the G20, especially during Turkey's chairmanship, should not promote the case of LDCs, but there is one world economy. There are those who are in a very difficult position. More of them are in developing countries, but the whole structure is now much more complex. And of course, this is an economic issue, but some concrete points are rather important. For example, cloud computing has changed the picture, and in the medical area, it has transformed. And actually, doctors have not been replaced. Diagnosis has been replaced, and actually, this health of course, dimension is extremely important because it's also a restructuring in public services and it's a more vital part of our lives. There, what happens is, for example, it can do better calculations and has big data, but it can do better calculation than 10,000 people with PhDs, but it can't create as much as a 2-year-old person. I mean, artificial intelligence cannot do this. And cognitive scientists have shown this, maybe in 50 years, but not yet. So I think many of us, we can still keep our jobs, I hope, for some time. But developments are drastic. And in Davos, there was unanimity about the continuation of the speed of the extension of technology and innovation. However, there was no consensus. I was not there, by the way, but I follow it from the internet. There is no consensus on the impact on employment. It can really put in difficulty some knowledge workers because their knowledge can be replaced. And it can also put out of their jobs some more mechanical workers. So the picture is unknown, but there is no reversal for this. This creative destruction, these disruptive technologies are creative disruptions. So their creative sides need to be taken up across the world. Of course, there can be this question, all these technologies are there, the potential output of the world economy is potentially up, but growth is not so much up. So now this is a question for debate. Precisely for this reason, these things need to be taken up by bodies like G20. It's a worldwide problem. Now, for our topic, G20, why is this relevant? It's relevant because it, first of all, it transforms the world economy. It's relevant because it has been neglected until now. And it's also relevant because it cuts across all groups of countries, developing, emerging economies, and the least developed countries. And of course, it's ironic that one of the most critical and important driving forces, and this is not a cliche, is out of the agenda in a way. I am not saying that it should be an item for negotiation, that a new institution should be created, etc. The form is not so important, but it should be in the analysis, first of all. It should be on the agenda. It should be taken up as one of the shapers of the economy and one of the factors which provide us with more instruments. And this, I think, is the job that T20 can do. No other, I think, formation can do it because we can propose this. But if we propose it as a sort of dramatic change in the way G20 is run, that will be rejected. If we propose it with some solid analysis for upgrading the capacity of the G20, it will be taken up. Now, I am not for saying, you know, we should have the goodwill to cooperate. No, this is not my approach. My approach is the following. I'm not enumerating what T20 perhaps could take up to present to G20. First of all, as I said, the analysis. Secondly, of course, there are questions of access. Like Mr. Kumar has also explained, it's not always easy, for example, in pharmaceuticals to accede to critical knowledge, even if you pay quite a lot of money. So there are questions of access. They are not limited to developing divide, but they are very serious. And increasingly, of course, as it was explained this morning, the factories cross the borders, but the capacity doesn't cross the border, and licensing can become even more difficult. You can buy the machines and the most advanced technology in the machine, but you can't really acquire the capacity to build a machine even half that capacity. So there is a need for interaction and also cooperation. Let us use the word. So some groups of people in the world should not be excluded from it. I think there will be a win-win situation if this is done. Secondly, for long-term investments, because most technology investments are long-term, there could be risk sharing. It would be like an investment for those who have more capital. Third, education is essential. I'm not saying this as a cliche. It is the capacity to produce. In Britain, 5-year-olds now, they have a compulsory computer code learning course. So it's not a sort of a mechanical, simple thing. It's just now a new way of producing. So you have to learn it from early on, and creativity comes up. And maybe the job dilemma also can be solved in this way. And let's not forget, for example, smartphones have been now distributed so much around the world, although only 40% maybe of the world have access to it, but it's quite a lot, and they can use it for all sorts of things, from India to Ethiopia to many countries. They can use it for improving productions, their finances, etc. I'm not saying there are no problems, but this is also an asset, of course, and it can be used. And also, there's an aging problem in some for European countries and also some other countries. So with strong education in still young countries, we can, I think, prepare a better world. And finally, perhaps on a more procedural but still very serious point, standards are becoming economic tools. And this is why TTIP now might exclude a lot of people if it is continuing in the way it is being negotiated now. Standards are, and also not only standards, but regulations, both of them, they need to be taken up the new way, not the way of the 20th century. They need to be fixed together. If some companies or countries are not up to the standards, there can be paths to reach the standards. But if they are excluded from the market, then they will never acquire these standards. So I thank you very much for your attention.
Now is the time to respond to questions coming from the audience. So I'll ask you to ask questions. Yes, sir.
So, yes, we talked about all these big things, high level, high technology and all that. But for a lot of people, it is the use in fairly simple things that technology matters, like increasing agricultural productivity. If you look at agricultural productivity in a lot of countries, in many developing countries, they're incredibly low compared to the other countries. Look at health. I mean, health is something which is very, but simple health. I'm dealing with tsetse fly. Dealing with tsetse fly will improve the agricultural production in Africa. I don't know, but I don't have any figures, but in a very important, by a very important scale. So these types of things I think are very important, and these should not be left behind. Health has been has been subcontracted to Bill Gates by the G20 countries. Basically, that's who Bill Gates is taking care of the world health. And I don't think that's a good sign for global governance. I think, well, maybe other people may think it is, but it is at least debatable. Another issue is how to use the existing, how fully is existing technology being used? For instance, remote sensing. Again, in Africa, by remote sensing, I have been told that the companies which have, and the countries which do have remote sensing data have incredible information about the availability of minerals all over Africa, but the African countries don't. So these types of issues, these types of public and private information, which has very important public impacts, I think is something which the G20 may look at.
Thank you. My name is Mustafa Turan. I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Turkey's G20 team member. My colleague here, Pınar, we've been listening to you throughout the day. It was extremely interesting and useful. We took a lot of notes, and we will obviously pass all the really good ideas to our team. Now, I just wanted to say a few words, not too long, conscious of the time. The Sherpa meeting that we had in December, our priorities were mentioned by our Deputy Prime Minister with the summary of 3 I's. And then 3 of the Sherpas took the floor and said, your 3 I's are great, but you should have had a 4th one, which should be innovation. That shows that innovation is really important in the eyes of some of the member countries. And with that understanding, of course, we share the importance that they give to this issue. There was also, during the Australian presidency, there was something called Innovation 20, which was an informal group. And we talked to them and we participated in their event. And now TEPAV and T20 will try to incorporate their work and their network into this work. So we hope that, I think they couldn't make it to this meeting, but maybe in the next meeting in Bodrum, they will be able to join you with some more input from what they have done last year on innovation. And finally, in my personal capacity, I would like to say, because I'm passionate about technology and innovation myself, have been very much aware of what's going on in the co-working spaces, the fab labs and creative districts around the world. And I observed that these trends are changing the world tremendously, some of which were mentioned by the chairman and the distinguished speakers. I think taking up on all these issues and looking at it from a perspective of the future that is emerging is extremely important for T20 to be able to guide the countries within G20 to really set the priorities right in the future. So we really encourage T20 to pay more attention to these issues and come up with really good policy recommendations at the end of this very productive year, hopefully. Thank you.
Yes, very interesting presentations. 2 basic comments in relation to patents. It's not really clear that patents favor research and development activity in the world. Yeah, that's something that needs to be questioned and addressed, because what is clear is that the access to patents has a big impact for developing countries and developing regions. In relation to the research and development itself, it's a global, in today's global world and multinational world, it's a global creation. And normally that global creation it ends up being patent in a country which benefits the patent, the localization of such assets, and afterwards the access to such intangible knowledge is restricted for the rest of the world, and that creates a problem. And in relation to that, it also creates a problem for in relation to something else that was mentioned for agricultural production. agricultural producing countries actually have problems accessing markets because they don't comply with the latest technology requirements from developed countries. And that's a non-tariff barrier that is imposed to developing countries. So that should also be addressed, I think, in relation to technology, although it has been mentioned already in some ways. Thank you.
That was a very delicious last meeting, the panel, thanks to the chair and the distinguished speakers. This is Murat Özgören, Vice Rector of 9 Eylül University, I announced before. I'm also trying to lead an ambitious project on international health innovation. And the more you try to lead such projects, you realize that whether you're a developed country or underdeveloped country, you have huge challenges ahead. And everything is subcritical, so you have to come together. And innovation is widely spread all over the world, whether you're poor or developed or non-developed. So the solutions have to come from somewhere, more like an Airbus model. Whether it's a tiny little screw or a big engine, we have to put together this Airbus. Okay? And that's the nice thing about it, is that it has been studied that in the next decade, the jobs that we have today will be about 50% of them will change. So there needs to be new job creations, and we need to, I mean, the disciplines need to be designed and so on. And also the global companies not being able to create new jobs, it needs to rely on the SMEs. And that's the technology development zone. So we shouldn't just say technology development, perhaps more innovation relay centers. So I think G20 needs to find ways or mechanisms to have these innovation relay centers come together to address these challenges. And that's the question I would like to address to Professor Kemal İnan, whether this would it be constructive rather than disruptive, if you use it that way?
Hi, my name is Adrian Timosas from the South Center. Thank you very much for this interesting panel. I just would like to make a short comment linking the previous panel on development and this one on science and technology. I think in the context of the LDC conference, LDC4 conference, if I'm not mistaken, there was a suggestion to create an international center for science and technology and innovation to help LDC countries. I don't know if this center was created, but if it was not created, perhaps the G20 could be an opportunity to get all the key countries of the world to support this initiative, because when you talk about development and science technology, we really have to support LDC countries on this context. Because this leads me to talk about, capacity building. Most of LDC countries, they really like strong capacity building. This doesn't necessarily means always in money, but the G20 countries, they could do more to provide capacity building for these LDC countries. Some of G20, they are doing a lot already, but perhaps we could do it together. And in this context, I think maybe the T20 could even consider having a kind of thematic session with think tanks of LDC countries, because we need to support capacity building in LDC countries. We need to create, these are the 20 countries having the excellence in think tanks, but we should also try to make excellence of think tanks to use this excellence to help to build the capacity in LDC countries, so that they could have think tanks that could also provide policy for the government. Thank you very much.
Yeah, a quick comment again, following Mustafa Bey's comment about Sherpa's meeting. I was there too, and also something to build upon the last comment. The problem between the developed and developing countries, I think, regarding this, in the developing world now, there is this sense that, you know, using public expenditure policies, using public expenditure budgets as a mechanism, there is this tendency to transfer technology to the developing world, basically. And it is moving, as far as I see, in a rather disordered fashion. You know, the Chinese are doing that, the Russians are doing that. In India, it's happening. Turks are now thinking about it. So in all the developing countries, that's why this innovation in technology and innovation thing is becoming more important for the developing countries nowadays. There is some technology in the developed world. We know that it can bring productivity gains, etc. There is definitely that issue that, you know, we don't have enough capacity to learn, maybe without spillovers. We are doing things, but we don't have enough spillovers in our economy, leading to those productivity gains at the end. And I think there is that kind of defense from the developed countries. That's the case in the Sherpas meeting, to the Sherpas that were talking about, you know, adding this into the agenda, this innovation thing, are from China, India, and you know, from developing world, basically. And the ones that are not talking are basically from the developed countries. So the issue is finding a kind of a mechanism, bringing these two together, I think. Because the issue, or, you know, this, in order to transfer that technology, the public expenditure budgets are definitely used by countries in the developing world, successfully or unsuccessfully, in a very disordered fashion. This, I think, we need to discuss how that can be done, in how this technology transfer could be done in a more orderly fashion, in a more productive fashion, in a way that can create more spillovers in countries like us. We don't know about that. And that's an issue that needs to be analyzed, as far as I see. And then we also have to think about how as you said at the very beginning, how the developed countries could gain something out of this. We also have to think about that, so we can find you know, some kind of a middle ground between these two positions. I think that's important now. That's what we need to focus on.
Thank you. Üsal Gasımlı, I am representing Azerbaijan. We have been discussing innovation and growth, two issues of vital relevance to the sustainable economic development, SDG. And I think G20 has to focus on functionality of existing linkage between innovation and economic growth through identifying and quantifying major constraints and perspectives. Why doesn't resource-based approach gives competitive advantage? Because competitiveness results from the inimitability, rarity, and non-tradability of intangible goods. So karaoke capitalism encourages business to create new ones, innovations, know-hows, rather than cover versions. And to this end, social Darwinism proves the importance of innovative-led development. And in accordance with the slogan of Turkish presidency, on three eyes, I think we should differentiate modernization and innovation, because innovation is a process of creation new ideas, but while modernization implementing these issues. And one more important point, to find out optimal ratio between industrialization and service sector in case of knowledge economy. For example, China referred to industrialization while India referred to service sector. In 16th last century, South Korea referred to industrialization while Brazil referred to service sector. That's why I think this commitment should be discussed among G20 countries, because there is a significant technological and digital gap between developing and developed nations. And that's why if we would like to commit to balanced and fair economic development in the world, we have to increase the availability of developing nations to new technologies. Thank you very much.
Can respond starting from the left? Would you like to respond to some of these questions? Whoever wants to. It's free.
I just mention three things. I think that probably in terms of what G20 can do. The first thing I think is probably it's not important to go there. Okay, now it's okay. I think probably three things that G20 can do. I think based on the what's been talked about. I think the first is the provision of knowledge or build a sort of global knowledge infrastructure, because we talked about the physical infrastructure, but I think we should think about a global knowledge infrastructure. I think that the knowledge would be available to all the countries and so on. So I think that there would be many of the G20 countries can contribute, because I think we've talked a lot about the national innovation systems, but in many smaller countries, it would be very difficult to pass that threshold to build a sort of truly sort of national innovation systems. So a global knowledge infrastructure, I think, is what really needed. And the second would be more of the institutions. I mean, governing the flow of knowledge and including IPR systems. And currently, it's of course very restrictive and not very conducive to technology transfer, and that need to be totally reformed. And I think the third issue, I think, is the risk governance aspect, including the internet security and privacy and so on. So I think that part also, I think there's a need to be a globally coordinated system. So those are the three things that I think G20 can tackle. Thank you.
Could I? Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to respond to a couple of points. One is about patents. It is correct that patents hold back knowledge and information and affect the technological capability building. But at the same time, if we don't have patents, the companies will not like to invent, the incentive system will be lost. So we need to strike a balance. And how, if you look at the history, how the different governments have done is that when they are developing, in the early phases of their development, they had typically soft patent laws to allow local firms to absorb knowledge of other countries. And then once you reach a threshold, then sort of strengthen the patent laws to encourage more innovation. And just to give you an example, Japan adopted the patent laws only in 1977. Before that, they had very soft kind of patent regime. And so this is the history of all different countries, actually. So we need to strike a balance, and what has been made complicated is by these TRIPS, that you have standard, same kind of patent system across the world. That is creating a problem. So it is not allowing the flexibility to governments to decide which level of patent system you want to be, depending upon what level of development you are. And the question by Timothy about technology for LDCs, I think there was a discussion about a technology bank in Istanbul Program of Action. Now, recently, in the context of Sustainable Development Goals, as UN Secretary General has set up a high-level panel on technology bank and STI mechanism, science, technology, and innovation mechanism for LDCs. So that will be looking into this. And lastly, very quickly, the point made by Professor Arda, I totally agree with you that many existing technologies need to be used properly. And for many problems, there are technologies available, but how accessible they are, that is the issue. For instance, 70% of emissions are related to energy generation, the coal-based thermal power plants and all. And technologies to bring down these emissions very dramatically is available. CCS, the carbon capture and storage and all. But highly guarded and proprietary technology, and so you won't get it easily. So this is the kind of thing which needs to be facilitated. Otherwise, world will get into disaster because of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. 3 points. First of all, the simple technologies that Mehmet Arda mentioned. This is very important. You don't need high-tech everywhere. But even for these, if you can access very big data banks, for example, or the accumulated knowledge, and also in traditional industries, some of them will disappear, few, but many will continue, like textile. They get upgraded. Secondly, of course, in this panel, we have colleagues from China and India. So, these countries, they have enormous technological capacities, which is maybe not up to US level. And in 5 years, we will see even where they come, because they are also progressing in basic science. And in, it's not a sort of black and white world. And finally, and Korea also has become a developed country, not only because of technology. Finally, what Güven said, this middle ground is very important. This is what precisely I was trying to hint at. So he formulated perhaps in a very convenient way. And this has these aspects. First of all, it's really mutually beneficial because it's also a question of demand. It will also increase demand throughout the world. Second, technology cannot be permanently divided into sort of lower technology capacity people and higher in the globalized world. So better to take it up together. And thirdly, it's not a voluntarist approach. It's a fact-based mutual gain for things like energy, environment, health, etc. These can only have global solutions. There is no doubt about that. Also global warming, etc. And technological improvement across the world has enormous benefits. This has been proved. So I think we should follow Güven's formulation and give it a try so that the G20 can see this is a realistic proposition coming from T20. Thank you.
I just want to make only one remark. So when we speak about innovations, when we speak about the access of developed and developing countries to different technologies, we should always bear in mind the level of education. It's a big topic, probably not for one but several sessions to discuss, but it is important. So innovation is not in something in vacuum. So it is in the context, and this context is the level of education. And if we take the developing countries, we should, the first thing we should think of is the level of higher education and the level of research in these countries. And then we could speak and continue the discussion of constructing a global science and innovation infrastructure that was mentioned during the remarks session. Thank you.
Okay, I think I have to make a few remarks. I tried to start the session to provoke people. I wasn't successful. At least for 2 people in the audience, I wasn't that successful. I tried to talk about future. Everybody's talking about the present. But the present is changing fast. I can tell you that. Now, from what I say now, you may think I'm mad, but there are people much madder than I am in Silicon Valley. I can tell you that, on other parts of the world. Things are changing extremely fast. If you know a little bit about the technology of the Google car, that it has a rotating laser beam, that can see 100 meters in all directions with an enormous database and can do self-driving, and that at least 3 states in the United States have started to prepare regulations for self-driving cars, you have to take it seriously. That's a new word. And the example that I try to provoke everybody here, nobody gave much attention to it except for a few voices here. This is what's happening. Things are changing, but I got bad news for you. Now, let me sound a little bit madder, right? The world has come to such a stage in technology that a minority of the population is able to generate the needs of the majority. There are 2 reasons for that. Not 1, 2. One is we have moved from resource economy into knowledge economy. That's very important. People do not understand the real meaning of that. In resource economics, when you are trying to exploit an oil or a mine or a coal mine, costs increase as you exploit it more. So you need more than one firms. It's the Ricardian differential rent at work, if you are an economist. So everybody contributes to that. In knowledge economy, all the value added is in the design. And the reproduction cost is very, very small. And it can be automated, comes the second point, right? And therefore, it's very much a winner-take economy. If it's a winner-takes-all economy, this is why I say superstars, that's what the 2 people from MIT did, then there's a real problem. And this problem was addressed for the first time by Keynes in the 1930 essay, which is famous, right? Economists for Our Grandchildren. He realized that in the 1930s. He has a beautiful essay. Read that essay. What happens if all the needs are satisfied? What the hell are we going to do? Sing? Maybe yes. He said that. Yes. So the value generation is no problem. How the hell are you going to distribute it? There was one model in the Soviet Union, the social way, that was unsuccessful. It wasn't successful. It was simply unsuccessful. In capitalism, it is not successful. Because if you don't have demand, if you have unemployment and no demand, the whole thing collapses. So what is I couldn't find I wrote a book on this, but I couldn't find the cure for that. And then one cure that's suggested by these 2 MIT people in the second machine age is that to have a salary for everybody, free. Right? Everybody receives this many dollars, and they can go, because you need demand, you need consumption, right? But this is very difficult to implement in the international world when the factors are not equalized. Think of the difficulties of trying to implement such a thing in the international world. Therefore, the present problem in the developed world is a burning one. It is because of these discrepancies, because of this disruptive effect of technologies, there's a lot of unemployment. And what happens, the first news for unemployment is certain jobs are migrating to China and to India. But what do you think will happen after that? Those people who will be more miserable than people in the United States will be the Chinese and the Indians, because the same technology also will come there. There is no escape from that. That technological advance will happen in all these countries, and unemployment will hit everybody. What is the solution? I do not know. This is why I started this whole thing with a futuristic remark. And these are things we should think about at this moment in history. If we don't want to just repeat and echo the things that are past history. Okay, I wish I could tell you the menu for tomorrow's dinner, but I don't know it. They didn't tell me. That's how I should know. So thank everybody for coming here.